everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of The Ghost Furnace. I am Bond, and I'm here with my cohort, Nick Pennsylvania. How you doing, Nick?
Pretty good.
That's good to hear. It's a very mild, late spring, early summer evening here in Western Pennsylvania, and we're really excited to sit down and talk about some fun stories. Really want to thank everyone who has been reaching out recently. We've had some really good feedback around some of the recent episodes that we've had, and we have people giving us a lot of like small ideas of things to research or like little questions. So we're gonna have more of those ghost lights type episodes in the future. So if you have any questions or things you want looked into, send them our way. Again, as always, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or at the Ghost Furnace podcast at gmail.com. So we have more of those coming up. But tonight we have a normal episode. But I do want to start with just kind of like a funny story that I think you guys will all appreciate out there. I couldn't tell you what horror movie this is originally from, but maybe Poltergeist, I don't know. But Nick, have you ever seen the like where like a clock will spin very quickly
Yes.
on the wall? And
yeah,
not,
I feel like it's not enough to be a cliche, but I feel like I've seen that more than once.
right. So I have a clock, like a lot of people do. I'm doing pretty well over here. I got a clock now. And what'll happen sometimes is the clock will tick very, very quickly and like spin around. And
Like an atomic clock that's resetting itself?
you know where I'm going with this.
Oh, this is things are going very well.
Right, yeah. I didn't know that's what this was. So this had happened twice, and I'd only just caught it like towards the end. And it was one of those things where I was just like, what in the world is the clock doing? Where it's the second hand is ticking at the normal second speed, but the minute and hour hand are like going extra quick, like 1 hour's worth of rotation in like 15 seconds. Both times that I'd seen it previously, it was like late at night. I heard the ticking before I saw it kind of thing, and saw just enough of it that I was just like, okay, I'm pretty sure this isn't paranormal, but it's enough to freak me out because it's like one of those experiences where you have enough time to like look at it and think about it and think like, what in the hell is going on? And kind of just like wrote it off the first two times. Well, last night it happened again, except I caught it early enough in this process, and I'm going over and I stand there and I literally take like a video of this thing happening, and I'm just like, I realize that's probably what's happening because it says atomic clock on it, and I'm like, man, if this thing doesn't stop at like 10 p.m. or whatever time it was, I'm like, I'm gonna be real freaked out. And thankfully it did stop. And then I actually did the research, and I thought atomic clocks were set off like in some kind of like internal atomic mechanism, like a quartz, but it's all based off of a radio signal.
Yes. Yeah, I was just about to say, despite the name, it is radio relay stations, is my understanding, that'll trigger it to correct itself. And I think those are done at regular intervals, although I could be wrong about that. I'm not the most knowledgeable person on the subject, other than I've had a couple atomic clocks, and it does, like, if you are not really familiar before buying one, what that means, it can definitely throw you off.
Yeah, it was just strange. And it was a good example of like where you have something that's just like a weird instance that kind of freaks you out, though it does have a very mundane explanation if you know about it.
Yeah, well, funny enough, I have another quick story for you, because there's that split second of fear, and I will say real quick, so it's very quiet where Brendan's at, but I live in a town that invented the Jeep, and they're having their Jeep festival right now. So even with the windows closed, it might sound like this is a field recording. So if you hear anything weird, that's what's going on. And I live next to a church where most people are parking. It's just a thing. But
yeah,
on the subject of the momentary fear of a mundane thing, unexpected, I was up a little later the other night, sitting up reading. Oh, I'm not gonna lie. I was sitting up and I was playing Bushido Blade because I brought
Like,
out the old. I brought out the PlayStation because my daughter wanted to watch this movie,
yeah,
and it's the only thing we have as a DVD player.
right.
So it was nice to like go through games like I haven't opened up in like 6, 7 years.
Hmm.
Anyway, sitting there this late at night, I catch a flash of white movement, and I'm just thrown off because an unexpected thing. It's a tea towel floating. We have two all black cats,
Right.
and there are other cats, but two of them are all black.
Yes.
And one of them, Seymour, had
Yeah.
just killed this all white tea towel and was
Oh.
carrying it through the dining room and
Dude.
really freaked me out for,
Oh my
again,
gosh.
a split second,
Yeah.
the same length of fear as if you're on the road and you wake up and you don't know where you're at for a moment.
Right. That's a good example. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
And
Black
then
cats are the best. Yeah.
oh, they definitely are because he was struggling with this tea towel because he was trying to walk and it was dragging on the ground. And he was tripping it. And finally, when my heart went down, we looked at each other. He looked at me and he just dropped it. He's like, "It's not worth it." You know, it's goofy, but yeah, that happened. And I was like, I looked at him and I thought to myself, he thought to me like, I should quit. This is just too much work. And I thought I should just go to bed. This is if I'm
both
gonna
had
get
a-
scared by a tea towel, I should just go to bed. So that's what happened.
It's that time of the night.
So you're
That's
getting
fair.
freaked out by clocks, and I'm getting
Like,
freaked out by
freaked out
tea
by-
towels. And some might say maybe we've been having too many of these conversations and researching too many of these stories that we're not the sort to tilt at windmills, but
Right.
we're
Oh my gosh. No, but
the
it's
sort
but
to get freaked out by ashtrays. I don't know what a
right.
similar thing.
No, but it is funny how, but like at the same time though, this whole clock thing, doing some research led me to another possible episode topic in the future. I know we've talked about number stations before personally.
Yes.
I don't think we've ever talked about it on an episode.
No. And
So I might do a whole number station episode, I think.
no, I like that because I had the shortwave out. I need to
Yep.
get back on because I know on this show I've touted UFO Joe and your
Right.
UFO show, and I'm missing
Yeah.
him. I haven't listened to him for a couple months, and I feel bad about that. So I encourage you all to find your UFO. The only half-hour long shortwave radio show exclusively about ghost recipes and gas prices across the American West that I'm familiar with, and I think it's a great show, and I mean that very sincerely. I've said my piece about that before, but today I think I was telling you right before we started here, I'm kind of in a little bit of a funk because I've been a purging thing, and I was going through a bunch of old letters and writings and things I've held on to for years and years, and I was getting rid of a lot of it, and there's this really good feeling of it's bittersweet because it feels good. You feel powerful, like not to be hyperbolic, but you do feel like, all right, I'm getting myself together when you get rid of things. But there's also this letting go of a younger self,
Right.
and I shared with you some of the things, and I'm glad I did. But it's one of those things that makes you realize the passing of time. And I think the thing that's most bittersweet is the realization, like, I'm very comfortable with who I am, but when I was a kid and reading those letters and reading those stories, I was always trying to be someone. But now I'm like pretty well defined, and I've cultivated a personality, I guess you could say.
Right. Right.
So there's that. And it made me, and this is a very roundabout and reaching thing, it made me think about, well, if there's any truth to these intelligent hauntings, look at the size of that leap, by the way.
Right.
The conversational leap right there. But if there's, I've said it before, I don't believe in intelligent haunting things or intelligent spirits. I believe in the replay, the stone tape thing, which of course you introduced me to the idea of that. But if there's anything to it, I think about, well, what stage of life is that where you're a young man and you're trying to be someone and you're wearing all the masks they say we wear, to being a person with an identity and a personality, a character almost, fully formed. What is the next thing? And while I got thinking on that road, the next leap was something I've expressed frustration with in the past. And I'm curious as to what you think. And I'm going to get to this point in the most roundabout way I can. And that is, we've talked about a lot of places that have been touched by famous and the infamous.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever these places are reported to be haunted, it's not the persons that spent the most time there. It's always the famous person. Like if Al Capone got an ice cream cone at this pool stand, you can be sure that any ghostly happenings will be accredited to Al Capone and not the kid that spent 4 summers working the ice cream stand. I don't know why that was the example I chose, but
yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
no, but yeah, exactly. So I was thinking about this, and then the thought attacked me because I was reading the other night, and I was reading an omnibus of ghost stories just for fun.
Oh, that's a cool looking one. Okay.
Yeah, it's a good book. This is for those of you that can't see, which is everybody except Bond and myself. That is the Big Book of Pennsylvania Ghost Stories by Mark Nesbitt and Patty A. Wilson, and I like it because it is again it's just shy of 350 pages proper, but all the stories are pretty quick. It's the sort of book. Like I applauded Thomas White for one of his factoid books because it's the sort of book that gives you a taste, it gives you the synopsis, and it sends you on your way looking for more.
Right. I had a similar experience to that recently. Not to completely derail everything.
No, go right ahead.
But,
I'm on track.
But I feel like a lot of our just general book lovers out there will appreciate this. I got this book at a used book sale at a library. I never heard of the author, never heard of, and it was called Haunted Uares, and it was about the Uares Mountains in the Carolinas. And it was originally printed in like, I think 2002. So not a new book by any stretch, but same kind of thing where it was like these stories where each one was like just like a few pages. And it's so nice when you find a book that you didn't expect to really enjoy, and it just like clicks, and the writing style is great, and the subject matter is like organized well, and that's just so nice when that happens.
Yeah. So I'm reading in this book, and I go to, because they have it broken down geographically, which is nice, but I
Love
just
it.
grabbed a couple stories, and I go to the Northern Tier, and let me see what this chapter is real quick. It is the Fiddling Phantom of Ole Bull. Now, are you familiar with Ole Bull?
Yes, it is one of the weirdest places, which is saying something.
But are you familiar with the man, the
I'm not.
legend?
I am a little bit, but I would love to hear your synopsis of it.
Well, I suppose I would have to anyhow, but for those of
Yeah.
you, so Ole Bull was a peer, a contemporary, and a peer of Paganini. As a violinist, he was, unsurpassed, except for arguably by Paganini. And again, that's all subjective. I throw my hat in Ole Bull's corner because he famously would file his bridges flatter so he could chord and things. And
Ooh, okay.
he specifically did this because Paganini didn't. Whatever, nerds.
Yeah.
Bottom line is, Ole Bull, born in Bergen, was a Norwegian nationalist. And of course, Norway, as you know, was under the thumb of Sweden at the time.
Mm-hmm.
He's something of a national hero, and I believe to this day, like he appears on stamps and even on the sides of Norwegian airlines. Our people in Norway can correct me on that. But he toured internationally, of course, came to America, part of his nationalist drive and desire to really foster Norwegian culture, heritage, and all of this, he was in Pennsylvania and he was looking to
Mm-hmm.
set up an independent Norwegian kind of settlement.
Right.
And so in the 1850s, I believe, he purchased a good bit of land. He kind of got shafted a bit in the deal. A lot of people cite the fact that, well, the land itself wasn't that great. This is in northern Pennsylvania, up in Potter County. You cited Ole Bull State Park. My dad has that cabin just
Right.
less than 4 miles from the site of uh, Ole Bull's house, which he had started to build on the hillside there. So while the land itself, the best land for farming, was actually kept out of the deal by the person that sold him the land, there were lumber rights and everything which could have been utilized. There were different mineral rights, again, which could have been utilized. Ole Bull and the, I think, 800 or some Norwegians that immigrated over to northern Pennsylvania with him didn't really capitalize on that. They set up essentially 4 villages, so we can assume around 200 people a pop. It was hard going. Eventually, most of them kind of spread out up in Mount Jewett, which is near the
Mm-hmm.
Kinzu Bridge. Most people, if they are familiar with the area, know of the Kinzu Bridge,
Right.
or they know of the Pennsylvania Grand Canyon. Both are pretty close to where we're talking about. So Mount Jewett has like a Scandinavian festival, and there are still a lot of Scandinavian or people of Scandinavian descent that live in the area, but a lot of them from those original settlements would move into Coudersport, or they would go down to Altoona or other places that were a little easier, and they either acclimated or they immigrated back to Europe. Or it's my understanding some of them may have ended out in the Midwest, where of course there's a lot of Scandinavians in
Right.
Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like my Antonia or something. But this comes back around. So these settlements were a failure by any stretch. There's the state park there, which you've been to as well, Ole Bull's colony, and you can walk around. There's very little left to suggest that there was ever a building on the site, but you can go to where Ole Bull was. And of course, the woods there are said to be haunted. And what do people hear? Well, they hear the violin playing of Ole Bull. Now, the thing that made me laugh in the book is it said you hear the sounds of his Stradivarius. Well, anybody that knows Ole Bull knows that
Mm.
he mostly played Gurnari,
Mm-hmm.
another Italian maker. I mean, but Stradivari is the name
The
people know.
people are gonna recognize exactly.
Right. And he did play Stradivari, but he was a Gurnari man anyhow. And he made his own. But anyhow. So this is what I'm talking about. Ole Bull, to the best of my knowledge, never even completed his house before everything kind of went belly up. But he's the only known person, like only really famous person. So of
Right.
course it's going to be haunted. And I think even without him, his
Mm-hmm.
presence, his thumbprint being on the place in any way, shape, or form, and arguably it's not, except for one brief moment in history. It's kind of a spooky place. The woods are
Mm-hmm.
dark. It's extremely desolate. You don't have any internet signal. You can forget about that. This is the only place I'm aware of that has a payphone still.
Right. And well, there is a payphone outside of Cook Forest
You are correct,
still.
sir.
There's I know
Yes.
that's so there's probably
But
yeah,
but I'm getting
but
back to it is
yeah,
kind of a spooky place.
and
The
like the names
closest
that
town has like 47 people in it.
right. It's that kind of area where you're just far enough out there that it's not like you're in the middle of like the northern Yukon territory or anything. But you could drive a good ways without seeing anybody or being near anything.
Right.
Um enough that that for most folks that can be a little even unconsciously unnerving. But one of the things about that area, like you said, with the forests and everything, that kind of like weird, at least weirded me out a little bit, is just because like the names of the different areas are kind of different enough. It has a bit of an otherworldly vibe because they did so much to try and bring that vibe to the colonies and
Yeah.
everything. Like, did you see the like the one area like that up the top of the mountain? It's actually they actually called it Valhalla.
Yeah,
Remember
that was
that?
his house.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
just like super cool, but also like when you see signs for Valhalla in the middle of the woods, you're just like, like,
Yeah, it is a little weird at first. Well,
yeah.
and it's my understanding that he was looking for places, a
Hmm.
place rather, that reminded him of Norway. And I
Right.
guess when he, because it's my understanding that Bergen, where he was born and
Yeah.
raised, is along the sea, and something about the mountains of northern central Pennsylvania, I guess, reminded him topographically, even though there was no ocean, but there were all the streams and whatnot.
Right.
So I guess that was a connection. But so here's the deal: like, if he could have chose, I
Hmm.
would imagine he loved Norway and Norwegian culture so much. Wouldn't he choose to be there? Why would he choose to remain in a place of his failure? But I guess at the same time, maybe he's a little bit here, maybe he's a little bit there. This
Right.
makes me ask a question. I think this is a luxury reserved only for the famous dead. I don't know of any common people that haunt multiple locations. But I can think of
Well,
famous people that haunt multiple
oh, for
locations.
sure.
And I think, again, this is because if there's anything weird, we attribute it to the person we know was there, even if it was only momentary.
Right. And I think that people love a good story. You know,
I'm
us
not
and
fond of
us and
bad ones.
us, yeah, us included. And so like I understand like the proclivity people have for wanting to insert famous people into stories to make them more just kind of catchy to those who are like the casual observer, I guess. Because if you say that Elvis is haunting a certain motel room, that sounds better than like, oh yeah, Steve, who just happened to stay there one night
Yeah,
back in
just
the
another
80s.
guy that OD'd on a toilet.
Right, yeah. It's so I think that has a lot to do with it, is just like the storytelling element has very little to do with the actual paranormal experiences people are having. So I think there's kind of a few ways to kind of look at that. Let's say hypothetically people are seeing, like, again, let's say it's Ole Bull, and let's say it's a violin in the woods, kind of thing
Yeah,
that people are hearing.
that's what they're
Um,
hearing. There's
yeah, like,
no site
yeah,
that I'm aware of, but go
right.
on.
But let's say that's what they're hearing and everything, and that's what they're attributing it to. We kind of go back to the like, okay, there's either two things, assuming it's a legit paranormal experience, there's just two things happening. Either this violin sound is just resonating in the woods, and it's just coming out of nowhere, or people are interpreting the world around them or projecting in some way. And because Ole Bull playing a violin is the most common guise you may put over a paranormal experience, like maybe that's what your brain is doing. So maybe people are hearing that more, even though it doesn't make as much sense as like, because he had a bunch of kids that died when they were there. I'm sure other folks died in those areas too. It's not like there was no tragedy or no uh
Yeah,
or
I
it's, and
don't.
it's
Did
not
he have
other.
kids that died there? I don't think he lived there that long.
Maybe they didn't die there. I know he had a bunch of kids because some of them had cool names if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
But I'm not sure how many of them died there. So that's a good point. I would have to look that up. But
yeah, because he, like I said, he never even. Well, one, he was still touring. He
mhm,
was barely there at all,
right, which
and
is
he didn't even finish his house.
right. So like I think that like that's why it's more likely to be people just kind of like putting that template over a paranormal experience. Or maybe because, like we said, maybe he is in more places than one. Maybe he is back in Norway, but because he did care about this place so much and had so much passion for, bringing, starting these colonies, these four different colonies and everything. Why couldn't they be in more than one place, I guess,
Yeah,
you know?
I kind of was thinking the same thing. Like, again, I only seen it attributed. There's a picture of one of his houses, by the way, in the old country.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Pretty sweet.
Super
Anyway,
cool.
I just kind of thought it now. Like I said, my initial thoughts were just about my frustration when we talk about, okay, maybe there's something to all this,
Mm-hmm.
but why do we give credit to the to the famous person out of the
Right.
gate? But then yeah, the only ghosts I've ever heard of that haunt multiple distinct locations separated
Mm-hmm.
by miles are famous people.
Right. You do hear that. Like, I'm sure there are I mean, maybe this is a sample size issue. Maybe it is,
Good
uh,
call.
maybe it is like it does happen more with common people, but we just don't hear about it because it's just like, oh, it was Aunt Etna, and she is at this house, and because her favorite rocker is over there now, she's sometimes over there. But we wouldn't hear those stories, because they're just kind of, a little more anecdotal and not,
Well, it does
you
make me
know,
think about, now that you say the rocker, it makes me think about haunted objects, what
right.
people
Well,
claim.
I mean, I
So
have a
when you
rock.
move the object, does the ghost follow you, or does just a part of it? Can it
Well,
jump to places, which means does it travel, or does it just
hmm
appear at those different places? If it's traveling, how come we don't see more ghosts on the commute?
yeah, like mid-flight. Yeah.
Right.
Um, yeah, exactly. Well, maybe that's what ghost lights mainly are. Maybe that's what UFOs are. Is they're actually ghosts traveling from one place to another.
Ah, you think it's like a greyhound then?
Maybe it's like a great, yeah, maybe that's, you know what, if that was like an animated cartoon or something like that, like I'd probably watch that. That'd be a great movie.
You've
Um,
already pitched it now.
I know
It's out in the ether.
I know now it's out there, but that's
But
actually a great
but
idea.
this is
But you know
like
what
a
I'm
real
saying?
question.
Yeah,
I
like,
do.
well, and I think that like this could be like a few things that are obviously happening, I think, but I think when you have like a haunted object, that's an interesting point because like especially with like Ole Bull, like if we knew one of his violins was on display near like that monument they have in the
Right.
park or something like that, it seems to like make sense. You're like, okay, a bit of Ole Bull's essence is in this
Yeah.
thing.
Well, and
Therefore,
I've said that
oh,
about
we've
some
talked about
banjos.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a
Yeah.
very tangible, I'm
hmm
I'm staring across the room. I've got a banjo that a very famous person
hmm
owned. And well, he still kind of owns it, but he gave it to me to.
hmm
It's essentially mine. It's just one of those things where he said, "Why don't you just watch it for me for a while?"
Right.
So he's had it since he graduated high school around 1962, and the oils from his hands are in it. The
hmm
oils from a very well-known Pennsylvania banjo maker, Bob Rock, are in it,
Right.
and so yeah, a very real physical part of them is retained within the wood.
So
Yeah,
maybe what's happening in those instances is it is a version of that person, or it is a because I mean, not to get too hyperbolic, but like or too metaphysical. Well, no, we're already there. Never mind. I don't know why I'm apologizing for
yeah,
that.
it's too late.
We're
What are
yeah,
we
we've
talking
we've
about?
we have jumped the shark. Yeah, like yeah, it's almost like a version of of a person. So it's like to say that it is or isn't that person is kind of like not getting to the root of what it maybe
More than
is.
more than a version, it's a piece of them.
Piece of yeah, like all like as much as I don't like to reference this necessarily, but it's almost like, are you familiar with the idea of the Horcruxes from Harry Potter?
Absolutely not.
Not, I didn't think so. I didn't think that was going to land, but I was like, yeah, we'll see. But for the, but
Somebody
for,
heard that,
yeah,
knew
but
exactly where you were
right.
going, though.
But that's obviously like a negative connotation. But the idea of like, okay, how you are, what your essence is, kind of stamped onto an object at a particular place and time. And I wonder with certain residual hauntings, like you mentioned, I wonder if that's what it is. It isn't so much that like a person's soul is in this place or that place or traveling between locations, but maybe it's more that because of either a someone spending a long time somewhere, an intense time, or just a really mindful kind of purposeful time, maybe that does leave little impressions places, and maybe that has just as much sentience sometimes as we do normally, it's just again like a version of someone. So maybe there's not as big of a distinction between the residual and the intelligent hauntings as we sometimes like to A B those two things. Maybe it's a
Yeah,
little more intertwined. You see what I'm saying? If that
I
makes
do, and every time we say residual, I hear stone tape because I thought like, oh,
right.
that's something I can wrap my head around. But
Well,
here's where
yeah.
mechanics of that fall apart for me because
Uh-huh. Right.
this is where I get lost and I stop buying things is like we've talked about the properties of quartz, and a lot of people go to quartz because, again, we use
As a
quartz
good
in order to make
example.
computer
Yeah.
memory and whatnot.
Hmm.
So it's able to be imprinted upon electrical energy and whatnot. I'm definitely speaking way outside my realm of knowledge. But the bottom line
Conceptually speaking,
is
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
bottom line is this is a material that can be utilized for these things. The people that say stone tape, that's exactly what they're thinking. So now we've talked about this haunted object and the ability for something to now appear in a place removed from where it had any relationship to in life. And I can't wrap
I
my
see
head
what you're
around
saying.
because
Okay.
there's so many. Wait, what is it? A rocker? Sure.
Yeah.
A haunted doll? How many of those are there? But
Hmm.
is there quartz rocking around in the teddy bear's eyes? Like by what can it transfer that memory, like a
Hmm.
computer memory, over to this new location because you brought this tangible object over
So
that doesn't have these same properties that the stone tape does?
speaking of jumping the shark, that's
I just want to say no
what
sharks have been
no, but
harmed in the
yeah,
midst
yeah.
of this
Just to
conversation.
be clear, sharks are cool. We don't want anyone putting them in tanks and jumping them over them with Harley Davidson motorcycles. Um,
I mean, it would look sick, but yeah.
yeah, it was pretty cool. Like, but yeah, don't do it. No, but what that does remind me of, Nick, is just like the idea of like Einstein's idea of spooky action at a distance, like quantum entanglement, like the location of a bit of information doesn't matter as much once it's been like created, like once things are entangled. So if you have like a rocker or something, spend a lot of time in it, maybe there is a way to energize that anywhere, even if there is no like quartz or some other kind of mechanism.
I
I
mean,
don't know. I'm just, yeah, I
yeah.
don't know. Just throwing stuff out there,
No, no,
you
no, no.
know?
I appreciate it. I mean, I'm getting stuck on mechanics because, again, if there's anything to this, I think we owe it to inquiry to be very
Hmm.
honest and
Right.
question and take the idea seriously. But this is where, again, that kind of falls apart. So, do I believe in haunted objects? I guess if they're made of certain minerals or have substantive properties of those,
Hmm.
that's what I'll say. I do think, though, again, just kind of jumping everywhere this evening. I remember kid in like junior high telling me a
Hmm.
tall tale about a Wendigo like creature, but he said, but it can't come close to anything man made. So if you're out in the woods and you see it, you got to like run into a house or something because it can't enter that because it's man made. And I thought, well, my shirt's man made. These shoes have been touched by man. In fact, I'm entirely man made, naked as
Ah,
a J. So
yeah.
like what like this is silly.
See, right. And
That's
that's
like when
where
there's too many mechanics involved.
right. Well, and that's why so much, and I'm sure our more magically inclined listeners will have thoughts on this. That's why some of like the semantics of certain rules or the implication of there being very specific language oriented rules and like things like that in folklore are so frustrating to some people. Um,
Yeah.
and again, I'm not talking about the validity of it, but it's like, okay, well, if you're telling me a vampire is super powerful, but it needs to be invited in,
I was thinking of
like
that exact
that's
same example.
yeah, it's one of because it's one of those ones where it because that again, like we talked about Thomas White about the silver bullet
Yes.
and certain things that have like intention. There's this mixing of both intention and mechanics whenever those things are mixed, they seem to feel more valid to a lot of people, it seems like. But whenever it's just the intention or just a pure mechanic, when it goes too far on either side, it tends to lose people on one side or the other because
Absolutely.
yeah, and I
You
think
don't
that's a
want
good
Superman.
thing.
You want a
Right,
good story,
right.
you don't want Superman. So there has to be,
Mm-hmm.
pros and cons. There has to be weaknesses.
Right,
I
right.
think that somewhere there's like the vampire has to go and get a warrant. It does seem like
Mm-hmm.
procedural like that. Like,
Right.
oh no, I know you want to kill me and be vaguely sexually
Yeah.
threatening, but no, you can't come in. This lemonade's
Yeah.
for me alone.
Yeah. It's like, oh,
So then now the vampire just sits there in front of the vestibule,
right,
going like, "Well, shucks, he's got me. He's got me.
right.
I'm gonna have to wait till he goes outside at any point. You haven't spared yourself anything." Or the vampire's like, "Well, you know what? I'm gonna get a warrant."
No, exactly. And that's where like I think that this duality between the mechanics and the intent seems to be so like diametrically opposed. Because if we go back to that Wendigo story, maybe the intent of that story is that, oh, the Wendigo cannot go into a structure that has been crafted by man because that represents man's mastery of nature, whereas the Wendigo is pure nature. Like allegorically, that now has something that you can like talk about.
Yeah, well, we've talked about the hide behind, which again,
Exactly,
it is a
exactly.
little silly, but it has a
Right,
real social utility,
right, and
and we've talked
that's
about our
mhm.
appreciation of that.
Right, absolutely. And that's where I think that sometimes the semantics are just semantics, where it's like, no, that's just we need to use words to tell a story, so don't get hung up on those words. Maybe the intent really does kind of matter. And that's when you get back into the intent versus the super mechanical stuff. Because you're right, it does seem to be really frustrating because it's like, well, why does this work, but this doesn't? And it's like, is it
Absolutely.
just because it's written in a book somewhere, or is there like a mineral component to this?
Yeah,
It's
I this is when people we talked about this in one of the well, I think the first Ghost Light
mhm.
was, our thoughts on ghost hunters tools and gadgets and
Right.
methodology. If we're looking at the science again, one of the big things is, to confirm a
Hmm.
hypothesis is if it has predictive capability. And so we're looking and we're talking about mechanics here today
Hmm.
of this. And it seems that if you wanted to prove or disprove, I think a lot more attention should be paid
Yeah.
to kind of meting out, well, what are the mechanics? Does that make
Right.
sense with you?
No, it does. And I think that's where what we said about the semantics kind of comes back in because that gets to the idea of intent. Because if you're ghost hunting because you want to find out why a ghost is haunting a area, that is a very different path of reasoning from is this place haunted? Um,
Right.
like the criteria needed to prove or disprove that second option is very mechanical, and it's not so much rooted in story, it's rooted in data. Whereas okay, we believe there is a spirit here of Billy. Why is Billy here? Let's use some of these tools to try and communicate with Billy and see what we can learn from him, see what he has to say.
Right.
That's
If this is
great.
a real thing, there's a
Yeah.
mechanic
Yeah.
involved
Like
there.
both
And
both those things are great, but you can't go in with that premise and then whenever you have an interaction with Billy, be like, see, we're now proving Billy is here. It's like, no, 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 you're already assuming Billy is here, you know? So
well, I kind of
don't
get what you're
add
saying there. That makes
like, but
sense.
don't add that mechanical element to it because you're already speaking about like narrative and communication and vice versa. If you're just trying to pick up data to prove something is haunted, like, I don't know if you need to add the narrative to it because those are different things in my mind
That
sometimes.
makes sense. I remember when we were talking about that social experiment where they
Yeah,
created a ghost.
the Philip
That's almost the
experiment,
opposite. Yeah, the Philip
yeah,
experiment. That's almost
yeah,
the opposite of what you described, where they're
yeah.
creating only a story.
Right, exactly. And I
Right.
think
And
that
then
I
there's that study that I often cite. I think it was in Scotland. I
mhm.
cite it so frequently here, I really should find it again, where they did try to only mechanics, and that was
Yeah.
kind of where they decided that there are environs
Hmm.
that make us feel like a place is haunted.
Right. And like that is super valuable information that we should have on certain locations. And then if you find if you find a correlation between, okay, we have all this data saying this place has some really anomalous stuff going on, and we have this like built narrative on the other side, then maybe it's worth saying, okay, like in some of these cases, is there a relationship between correlation and causation?
Yeah.
But like that should be like the fourth step is asking that question, not starting with it, being like, oh, like I got a spooky feeling in here that must be Billy.
Well,
It's like,
let me throw this
oh,
at you. Let me throw this at you as an experiment.
I love experiments,
I know you do.
love data. Yeah.
We go somewhere people have not been, because all of our stories of ghosts,
Mm-hmm.
with rare animal exceptions, are our people. The vast majority are people stories. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
let's go to a place where there haven't been people or animals. Let's go to the moon.
I was
We
gonna
have
say,
the
yeah,
technology to do it.
yeah.
Or we go to Antarctica even, okay? All
Mm-hmm.
right. Unless we find a haunted penguin. Here's what I'm getting at. We know features of a building that can create the
Mm-hmm.
sensation that it's haunted. Let's build a haunted building on the moon.
And see,
We have the
that's
resources. We have
that's
the ingenuity. But I'm serious though.
yeah,
Let's build the haunted place where we know there's no narrative.
yet established.
Okay?
Yeah.
Right. And not only is there no narrative, but if we get really silly and we go on the moon,
Mm-hmm.
we know there's only been a handful of people that have walked on it. We
Right.
know that there hasn't been any animals outside of maybe microbial things yet to be discovered that have been
Mm-hmm.
hanging out there. We don't write ghost stories about microbes.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should. Yeah, that's a
Well,
good
maybe we
point.
should. There's a whole untapped market. You're right. Anyway, that's kind of my thing. I feel like if we could demonstrate that we can create just a haunted place, then what does that say? Like, what story does our mind create to explain why we're feeling, hearing, sensing what we are?
Right. And I think that like to tie this back to Ole Bull, it's almost as crazy as that sounds, Nick, as a premise. Is it really that much crazier than traveling thousands of miles to recreate your home in someplace new? You
That's
know,
a good point. You know who's haunting the moon?
who's haunting the moon? I'm
Neil
curious.
Armstrong.
Ah, I
You
bet
know
it
what? You
is.
know what people claim to hear when they're walking around on the moon?
Is it him?
Golf swings.
Just
Yeah.
golf. Yeah, just him saying four, and then
Right.
shanking balls. Yeah.
Once shanking balls. One small step.
But yeah, no, I think that's an interesting point. I'd be curious to see what everyone out there thinks. So if you have any
Yeah.
thoughts on why we should or shouldn't build a haunted structure on the moon, please reach out and let us know. But seriously,
Frankly, the moon needs some infrastructure,
it
don't you
needs
think?
something, and it might as well be. If you're gonna build something, it might as well be
Right.
haunted.
It would be
Like make
very
it
human.
like make it. It would be very human.
Well, we've done it again, Brendan.
We
We have had a conversation that started way over here and ended way over here. And I'd like to think there was some good points in the middle.
I like to think so too. We'll have to let the listeners be the judges there. But if you have any thoughts on what we're talking about, or if you have anything else that you'd like to share with us, we haven't. There's a few interviews we're working on right now.
Very exciting.
Yeah, some very exciting interviews. Hopefully, those come through. But if you'd like to tell your story on this podcast, or just have a story you'd like to share with us,
Or bandy about a word like protuberance.
yes. Um, You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, or you can just send us an email at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com.